I'm writing this from a hotel room at 1 a.m. with my phone face down on the nightstand and my suitcase still half zipped because I can't go back to my apartment. Not tonight. 3 weeks ago, I was measuring my ring size like it was a secret ritual, scrolling jewelers on my lunch break, rehearsing the exact sentence I wanted to say when I asked him to marry me. Now I'm hiding from him like he's a stranger who knows where I sleep. It didn't start with lipstick on a collar. It didn't start with a late-night work meeting. It started with holidays. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every random commercial with a happy family. Noah Parker would crack in a way that made my chest tighten. His smile would hold for everyone else, then shatter the moment we were alone. "I'm fine," he'd whisper, eyes fixed on the window like his own reflection might accuse him, and then quieter. "I just don't have anyone." So I did what people do when they love someone and think love can fix the past. I decided my engagement gift to Noah would be the thing he wanted most, his family back. I tracked down his parents. I found his brother. I found the life he swore had rejected him. And the moment I stepped into that neat, maple-lined neighborhood 2.5 hours north, the first crack appeared in my perfect plan, because his mother's face didn't light up with joy when I said Noah's name. It collapsed. His father stared at me like I'd delivered bad news. Then his dad said something that turned the air in my lungs to ice. "If he hasn't told you why we don't speak," he said, voice rough, "there's a reason. And you need to hear it before you make any permanent decisions." Permanent decisions. Like marriage. Like a ring. Like a life. I tried to laugh it off on the drive home. I told myself, this is exactly what Noah warned me about. They're manipulative. They want to control him. But then I met his brother 2 days later. And I learned the real reason Noah was abandoned. Not because his family was cruel. Because Noah had been cruel first. Quietly. For months. The kind of cruelty that ends pregnancies. The kind of cruelty that texts a woman after she miscarries and mocks her for it. And the worst part? He had made me fall in love with the version of him that never existed. My name is Taylor Reed, and I'm 28. If you'd asked me a month ago to describe my life, I would have said stable, quiet, built on the kind of love that doesn't need fireworks to feel real. I'm a software engineer, the type who color codes calendars and thinks in checklists. I like predictability. I like plans. I like knowing what tomorrow looks like. And that's exactly why Noah Parker felt like the safest kind of love. I met him when he was 25, at a charity fundraiser for homeless animals. My company had sponsored the event, and I'd gone in my corporate good citizen outfit. Blazer, uncomfortable shoes, polite smile ready. Noah wasn't dressed like he was there to network. He was in jeans and a hoodie with a tiny smear of flour on the sleeve, like he'd rushed over from a kitchen. He was volunteering at one of the booths, handing out treats he'd baked himself for the volunteers. And he did it with that soft, careful energy, like making people comfortable was second nature. I remember standing near a row of dog crates, reading the little signs taped to each one, when Noah started talking to me about an old beagle named Henry. "Everyone walks past him," he said, voice tight around the words. "They see arthritis and they hear expensive vet bills. They don't see how gentle he is." His eyes got glossy as he spoke, and I swear I didn't even think. I pulled out my phone and donated an extra $1,000 right there. It wasn't just the dog. It was the way Noah cared, the way his empathy seemed endless. That night, we exchanged numbers, and the first year with him was steady, easy in that quiet, grown-up way. Noah worked as a receptionist at a dental office. He lived in a small studio across town. I had a decent one-bedroom in Harbor Heights, something I could afford on my salary. Clean, bright, the kind of place that felt like mine. He started coming over most weekends. We cooked together. His favorite was stir-fry because he said it made him feel like he had control over chaos. We watched movies. We took long walks by the waterfront, his hand always tucked into the crook of my elbow, like he belonged there. Noah was quiet but warm. He laughed at my dumb jokes. He remembered little details, my coworker's new baby, the name of my manager's dog, the fact that I hate cilantro. Those tiny acts of attention made me feel seen. My parents met him 6 months in. My mom pulled me aside the next day and said, "He seems lovely, Taylor. He's gentle." And I believed her. Around month 8, I noticed something strange. Noah never talked about his own family. When my parents invited us for Thanksgiving, he said he had to work. When Christmas came, he stayed alone at his apartment. I brought him leftovers from my family dinner and found him watching holiday movies by himself, with a frozen meal balanced on his lap like he'd accepted loneliness as tradition. He thanked me, kissed my cheek, and didn't explain. I asked him in January of our second year together, We were walking through Riverside Park when we passed a big family having a birthday picnic. Noah stopped like he'd hit an invisible wall. He stared for a long, silent stretch, 30 seconds that felt like a whole confession he refused to give. Then he squeezed my hand and said, "My family is complicated." I waited. He didn't continue. He just turned the conversation to my upcoming work project as if he'd thrown a blanket over something burning. Over the next months, pieces came out. His parents were William and Mina Parker. He had an older brother, Mason, who was 32. Noah described them as controlling, critical, the kind of people who made him doubt his own memory of childhood. He said Mason was the golden child who could do no wrong, and Noah was the one who always made problems. He told me he moved out at 22. He told me they called him selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. And he told me cutting them off was the healthiest decision he ever made. I believed every word, because my own family was supportive, and I couldn't imagine anyone lying about something that painful. So when Noah cried during commercials about happy families, I held him. When he went quiet on holidays, I made sure he knew my family welcomed him. By our second Christmas, my mom was calling him part of us, and Noah slowly warmed up. He came to more dinners, helped my mom in the kitchen, played board games with my younger brother like he was practicing being someone's forever. By year 3, I was sure. I didn't just love him. I had started building my future around him, without realizing he'd built his life around a story that wasn't true. Looking back now, the warning signs were never loud. They didn't scream, they whispered. At the time, I mistook that quiet for depth. As Noah grew closer to my family, the contrast between his world and mine became sharper, and more unsettling in ways I didn't yet have language for. He was attentive, almost too attentive. If my phone buzzed, he'd glance over instinctively before catching himself and smiling like he hadn't done anything at all. If I mentioned a male coworker, even casually, he'd ask follow-up questions that sounded interested but landed somewhere closer to surveillance. "What's he like? Does he talk to you a lot? Oh, how long have you worked together?" Nothing accusatory, just precise. I told myself it came from insecurity, from abandonment issues, from the family trauma he carried like a quiet bruise. Another thing I brushed off, Noah never wanted me to see his phone. Not in a dramatic way. He wasn't secretive in the obvious sense. He just always positioned it face down, took calls in the bathroom, changed subjects if a notification lit up while we were together. Once, joking, I reached for it while we were cooking. He froze. Not angry, not defensive, terrified. "Please don't," he said softly, like I'd almost touched something sacred. I apologized immediately. He smiled. The moment passed, but it lodged somewhere in my chest. There were no old friends in his life, no childhood best friend who dropped by, no college roommate, no one who knew him before 22. When I asked, he said people drifted. He said he preferred keeping his circle small. Again, I believed him. Then there was his family story. Every time I tried to understand it more deeply, he'd redirect with practiced grace. If I asked what his parents had done specifically, he'd say, "It's hard to explain." If I asked what finally caused the break, he'd say, "It was a lot of little things." When I asked about his brother Mason, his jaw would tighten just slightly. "He always took their side," Noah said once, even when he knew they were wrong. And every time I would nod and tell myself I was being supportive. That love meant not forcing someone to reopen wounds they'd worked hard to close. But the atmosphere shifted the moment I started talking about the future. Not in the abstract, we talked about that easily. Kids someday, a dog someday, a bigger place someday. The tension came when someday started looking like a calendar date. When I mentioned my cousin's wedding, Noah asked too many questions about timelines. When I said my parents were asking when we might get engaged, his smile flickered. "Just pressure," he said lightly. "We don't need to rush." But then, later that night, he cried in my arms over a random TV scene where a man proposed at a family dinner. "I just don't want to lose you," he whispered. And I held him, thinking, this is what trauma looks like. This is what healing takes. What I didn't realize was that Noah wasn't afraid of commitment. He was afraid of the truth catching up. The more secure our life became, the more carefully he curated his version of the past. I noticed how precise his language was, how he always framed himself as the one who reacted, never the one who acted. "They pushed me away. They made me leave. They stopped calling. Never, I did something. Never, I crossed a line. Never, I hurt someone. And still, I planned a proposal. Because I thought love was about patience. Because I thought if I showed him unconditional acceptance, he'd eventually trust me with everything. Because I believed that if a person cried alone on holidays, they must be the victim. I didn't understand yet that some people don't cry because they were abandoned. They cry because they were never forgiven, and they know exactly why. Looking back now, the warning signs were never loud. They didn't scream, they whispered. At the time, I mistook that quiet for depth. As Noah grew closer to my family, the contrast between his world and mine became sharper, and more unsettling in ways I didn't yet have language for. He was attentive, almost too attentive. If my phone buzzed, he'd glance over instinctively before catching himself and smiling like he hadn't done anything at all. If I mentioned a male coworker, even casually, he'd ask follow-up questions that sounded interested but landed somewhere closer to surveillance. What's he like? Does he talk to you a lot? Oh, how long have you worked together? Nothing accusatory, just precise. I told myself it came from insecurity, from abandonment issues, from the family trauma he carried like a quiet bruise. Another thing I brushed off, Noah never wanted me to see his phone. Not in a dramatic way. He wasn't secretive in the obvious sense. He just always positioned it face down. Took calls in the bathroom, changed subjects if a notification lit up while we were together. Once, joking, I reached for it while we were cooking. He froze. Not angry, not defensive. Terrified. Please don't, he said softly, like I'd almost touched something sacred. I apologized immediately. He smiled. The moment passed. But it lodged somewhere in my chest. There were no old friends in his life. No childhood best friend who dropped by. No college roommate. No one who knew him before 22. When I asked, he said people drifted. He said he preferred keeping his circle small. Again, I believed him. Then there was his family story. Every time I tried to understand it more deeply, he'd redirect with practiced grace. If I asked what his parents had done specifically, he'd say, "It's hard to explain." If I asked what finally caused the break, he'd say, "It was a lot of little things." When I asked about his brother Mason, his jaw would tighten just slightly. He always took their side, Noah said once, even when he knew they were wrong. And every time I would nod and tell myself I was being supportive. That love meant not forcing someone to reopen wounds they'd worked hard to close. But the atmosphere shifted the moment I started talking about the future. Not in the abstract, we talked about that easily. Kids someday, a dog someday, a bigger place someday. The tension came when someday started looking like a calendar date. When I mentioned my cousin's wedding, Noah asked too many questions about timelines. When I said my parents were asking when we might get engaged, his smile flickered. "Just pressure," he said lightly. "We don't need to rush." But then, later that night, he cried in my arms over a random TV scene where a man proposed at a family dinner. "I just don't want to lose you," he whispered. And I held him, thinking, this is what trauma looks like. This is what healing takes. What I didn't realize was that Noah wasn't afraid of commitment. He was afraid of the truth catching up. The more secure our life became, the more carefully he curated his version of the past. I noticed how precise his language was, how he always framed himself as the one who reacted, never the one who acted. They pushed me away. They made me leave. They stopped calling. Never I did something. Never I crossed a line. Never I hurt someone. And still, I planned a proposal, because I thought love was about patience. Because I thought if I showed him unconditional acceptance, he'd eventually trust me with everything. Because I believed that if a person cried alone on holidays, they must be the victim. I didn't understand yet that some people don't cry because they were abandoned. They cry because they were never forgiven. And they know exactly why. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, William's voice replayed in my head. Permanent decisions, like the word itself carried weight. By Sunday morning, I'd convinced myself of two things at once, even though they contradicted each other. First, Noah's parents were exactly what he said they were. Subtle, strategic manipulators who knew how to plant doubt without saying anything concrete. Second, something was wrong in a way I couldn't explain away. I messaged Mason Parker again that night just to confirm. He replied almost immediately. Monday, noon, coffee shop near my office. I called in sick to work the next morning. The drive back to Greenfield felt longer than the first one. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles aching. I rehearsed what I would say, over and over. "I love your brother. I'm trying to help him. I want to fix this." The coffee shop was quiet. Neutral colors, soft music, the kind of place where people had serious conversations without wanting to be overheard. Mason was already there, sitting at a table in the back. He looked older than 32. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped forward like he'd learned not to take up space. He was still wearing scrubs, which told me he'd come straight from work. He didn't smile when I sat down. I launched into my prepared speech before I could lose my nerve. I told him I loved Noah, that I wanted to help repair whatever had broken their family, that I was planning to propose and hoped, someday, that his family could be part of our life. Mason listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a short, humorless laugh. "What did Noah tell you about me?" he asked. I repeated the story I knew by heart. The golden child, the favoritism, the betrayal. Mason nodded slowly. "That's a nicer version," he said. Then he asked one question that made my stomach drop. "Did he ever mention Evan?" I shook my head. Mason took out his phone. And everything I believed started to collapse. He told me Evan was his ex-wife's husband. They'd married when Mason was 26. Noah had been 22 and had just moved out of their parents' house. When Noah asked if he could stay with them temporarily, Mason and his wife, Claire, said yes, without hesitation. Family helps family. Noah lived with them for 8 months. During that time, Claire got pregnant. The pregnancy was hard, exhausting. She worked long shifts as a dental hygienist, came home nauseous, drained, barely able to eat. Noah stayed home most days between jobs. He got close to Evan. Too close. Mason told me how he'd come home early one afternoon, 12 weeks pregnant, sick and dizzy, and found Noah in bed with Claire. The coffee shop noise faded as Mason spoke. His voice was steady, but his hands shook when he lifted his cup. He told me about the excuses, the scrambling, the way Evan swore it was a mistake. Mason said he wanted to believe it, but then he found the messages. Hotel receipts going back months, plans, photos. It wasn't an accident. It was a relationship. 2 weeks later, Claire miscarried. 14 weeks. Mason stopped talking for a moment, staring at the table like it might anchor him. "I don't know if stress caused it," he said quietly. "Doctors won't say that for sure, but the timing..." He shook his head. "It broke her." I asked the question my heart didn't want answered. What did Noah say after? Mason unlocked his phone and slid it across the table. Text messages from Noah. I read them once, then again, and again. Noah told Claire she was overreacting, that the miscarriage probably happened because she was too old to have a healthy pregnancy anyway, that she should have paid more attention to her husband instead of working so much, that maybe losing the baby was a blessing because she would have been a terrible mother. My hands went numb. The man who cried at family commercials had typed those words. Mason told me their parents tried to reconcile for a year, tried therapy, tried space. Eventually, they respected Claire's decision not to see Noah ever again. That's when Noah left town, changed his number, changed the story. Mason looked at me with something like pity. "He's very good at playing the victim," he said, "but he knows exactly why he's not welcome." I drove home in a fog. When I walked into my apartment, Noah was there, humming softly, chopping vegetables, smiling like nothing in the world had shifted. And I sat at the counter watching him, wondering how long he'd been lying to my face. I didn't confront Noah that night. I told myself I needed time to breathe, time to think, time to figure out whether the man standing in my kitchen was capable of the cruelty I'd just seen on Mason's phone. Noah cooked dinner like nothing had happened. He asked about my weekend, asked about my college roommate, told me about a patient who'd brought cupcakes into the dental office and how sweet that was. I nodded. I smiled. I answered in half sentences. All the while, my mind was replaying text messages I couldn't unread. Maybe losing the baby was a blessing. You would have been a terrible mother. I watched Noah's hands as he cooked. Careful, precise, gentle. Those were the same hands that had typed those words. That disconnect was unbearable. I barely slept. By Tuesday evening, the pressure inside me had reached a point where silence felt like complicity. Noah came over again after work. We watched a show we'd been following for months. He laughed at the right moments. He leaned against me on the couch like he always did. When the episode ended, he reached for his jacket. That's when I spoke. "Do you remember living with Mason and Claire?" The change in him was instant. His shoulders stiffened, his color drained. He set his bag down slowly, like any sudden movement might shatter something. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I told him everything. That I'd gone to Greenfield, that I'd met his parents, that I'd talked to Mason, that I knew about Evan. He started crying before I finished the sentence. Big, shaking sobs, hands over his face, breath hitching like he was the one being wronged. "Mason lied to you," he said immediately. "He always does this. He twists things." He said Evan pursued him, that he tried to say no, that he was young, confused, vulnerable. He said Mason had always been jealous of him, that Claire never liked him and wanted a reason to get rid of him. I asked about the messages. He hesitated. Then he said he'd been hurt, defensive, young. "I didn't mean those things," he said. "I was lashing out." I asked if the affair had lasted 4 months. He said no. I asked about the hotels. He said Mason exaggerated. I asked if it was mutual. He said it's complicated. And that's when something in me hardened. Does a 4-month affair with plans for a future together sound like something complicated? I asked. Or something deliberate? He cried harder. He said he was a different person now, that everyone deserves a chance to grow, that judging him for something that happened years ago was unfair. And maybe, if that was all there was, I could have found a way to process it. But then Mason called me on Thursday. His voice was tight. He told me Noah had contacted him for the first time in 4 years. Not to apologize, not to take responsibility, to threaten him. Noah had told Mason to stay out of his life, to stop interfering with his relationship. And if Mason contacted me again, Noah would call Child Protective Services anonymously, claim Mason and Claire were neglectful parents. Mason said none of it was true, but an investigation alone would tear their family apart. That was the moment the mask slipped completely. I called Noah immediately. He answered on the first ring. When I asked him about the threat, he laughed, softly. "You're taking this way too seriously," he said. "It was hypothetical. I was just setting boundaries." "By threatening his children?" I asked. "You don't understand," he snapped. "Mason always plays the victim." That was it. The voice, the deflection, the refusal to own even a single decision. I told him we were done. He started yelling, said I couldn't end a 3-year relationship over the phone, said I owed him a face-to-face conversation, said I was abandoning him just like everyone else. I hung up. 3 days later, our joint savings account was empty. $8,000. Gone. Noah texted me from a new number, explaining calmly that he'd taken what was his. He said we could discuss the rest, if I agreed to meet him. That's when the situation stopped being emotional and started being dangerous. Because the man I thought I loved wasn't just lying. He was escalating. And I was finally starting to understand that the tears, the vulnerability, the broken family story, it was never weakness. It was a strategy. The lowest point didn't come with screaming. It came with silence. After I blocked Noah's number, the apartment felt hollow, like it had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe back in. Every room carried the outline of a life that no longer existed. His mug still sat in the sink. A sweater he liked was folded over the back of my chair. The spare toothbrush by the bathroom mirror stared at me like an accusation. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Marcus for what I told myself would be a few nights. Those few nights turned into a week. Noah didn't stop trying to reach me. He called from unknown numbers. He left voicemails that swung wildly, apologies that cracked into anger, pleas that sharpened into blame. "You're just like my family," he said in one message, voice trembling, running away instead of fixing things. In another, his tone went flat and cold. "You think you're better than me, after everything I gave you?" I listened once, then I stopped. I told myself distance would calm him down, that once the shock wore off, he'd accept it and move on. I was wrong. On Thursday, Mason called me again. Noah had reached out to their parents, demanding money. When William refused, Noah sent messages blaming me for ruining his life, claiming he was broke, homeless, abandoned. Mason said their parents were scared, that they'd started locking doors, watching the driveway. I felt sick. That night, Marcus sat across from me at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug. "You need to take this seriously," he said. "This isn't just heartbreak." I nodded, but part of me still resisted the word danger. It felt dramatic, unreal, like admitting it would mean acknowledging how wrong I'd been about everything. Then Saturday came. Noah texted me again, this time about the money. He said he'd taken the $8,000 from our joint account because he deserved it. He said he was willing to discuss the engagement party costs if I met him in person. I agreed, public place, daytime, coffee shop. I told myself it was about closure. He showed up wearing the dress shirt I once told him made his eyes look softer. He sat down and immediately started talking about us, about therapy, about forgiveness, about how couples survive worse things all the time. When I told him I wasn't getting back together, that I just wanted to settle finances, his face changed. The sweetness drained away. "You're humiliating me," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to glance over, "after everything I've been through." I stood up, left cash on the table, and walked out. He followed me to my car. "I won't let you throw this away," he said, voice low. "You'll regret this." I blocked his number again. That night, he showed up at Marcus's apartment building. He stood outside, calling up to the window like he still belonged somewhere he didn't. Marcus told him to leave or he'd call the police. Noah came back an hour later. The third time we called. The officers made him leave and warned him not to return. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. The engagement party was supposed to be the following Saturday. 40 people invited. My parents, my co-workers, friends who had already bought outfits and booked babysitters. I sent a group message canceling it. Most people were kind. A few asked questions. I gave none. Then Noah started messaging people himself from a new number. He told them I'd called off the engagement because of a family disagreement. He told my mother I'd ended things without warning. He told my coworkers I'd cheated. None of it was true. I called the venue again, voice shaking, and explained the situation had escalated. They agreed to refund half. I lost $6,000. My parents told me not to worry about the money, that my safety mattered more. But the guilt sat heavy in my chest anyway. Another cost of loving someone I never truly knew. That night, lying awake on Marcus's couch, I stared at the ceiling and finally let the thought surface fully. I had been manipulated. Not just lied to. Not just misled. I had been chosen carefully because I was kind, stable, forgiving. Because I believed people when they cried. Because I thought understanding meant excusing. That realization hurt more than the breakup. Because it meant the life I thought I was building had never been real at all. It was a stage, and I had been cast perfectly. The turning point came without warning. I had convinced myself that the worst was behind me. That after the police, after the restraining order, after Noah's relentless messages, the universe would finally cut me a break. But then came the final piece of the puzzle, the one I didn't want to face, the one that made everything crystal clear. The evidence. It arrived quietly, just another one of those unexpected moments that forces you to see everything you've been avoiding. It came through Miranda, of all people. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I need you to know something." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, as though I knew what was coming, but still couldn't prepare for it. "Nicole contacted my parents again," she said, voice thick with disgust. "This time, she demanded money, told them she was broke, homeless." I sat there, frozen, clutching the edge of the counter. I didn't even have to ask how my name fit into this story. Miranda went on. "Dad refused to give her anything, so she texted him, blaming you, blaming everyone. Said she was ruined because of you." That was the moment. The thing I'd been denying was right in front of me. I realized Noah's pattern wasn't just a relationship issue. It was a calculated manipulation of everyone around him. When I didn't answer immediately, Miranda pressed on. "I just don't want you to think you're alone in this," she said. "I'm still worried about her, Taylor. I think she's going to escalate. I need you to be careful." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, but I heard the truth in it. I had never considered the depth of Noah's fixation on control. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't even about me or Miranda anymore. It was about his refusal to let go of the narrative he'd built for himself. The victim, the abandoned one, the misunderstood angel. And somewhere along the way, I had become just another prop. The thought sickened me, but also lit a fire in me I hadn't realized was there. I had given Noah so much grace, so many chances. I had excused the red flags, the contradictions, the lies, because I believed in the good I thought was buried beneath the surface. The truth was that he was a master at manipulation, and I was just another part of his carefully constructed story. But that's when I realized I didn't have to keep being a part of it. I was finally seeing Noah for who he truly was, and who I had been foolishly protecting. It wasn't just that he had cheated, or that he'd lied. It wasn't even that he'd taken what he wanted from me, physically, emotionally, financially, and then discarded me. It was that he had never let me see the whole picture. He had sold me a version of himself that only existed for the length of our relationship, and it had served his purpose perfectly. I knew now what I had to do. I took a deep breath and told Miranda I was grateful for the warning. Then I hung up the phone, sat down, and finally made the decision I should have made weeks ago. No more excuses. I wasn't going to let him rewrite this story any longer. I was going to tell everyone the truth, not just for me, but for the people he had hurt, manipulated, and silenced along the way. I had spent so long carrying this weight, trying to understand why someone who claimed to love me could hurt me so deeply. But now I understood it wasn't about love. It was about power. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I had power again. The fallout didn't come immediately. It didn't come with a single confrontation or a dramatic outburst. It came gradually, like an infection that spread quietly, unnoticed, until it was too late to stop. I started with the people who needed to know the truth. My family, my friends, my coworkers. I wasn't about to let Noah tell a story that painted him as the victim, especially when I had been the one gasping for air, suffocating under the weight of his lies. It was terrifying, telling the full story, even when I knew it was the right thing to do, because the truth didn't just destroy Noah's version of events. It shattered everything we had built, every quiet lie I had let him feed me. The first person I called was my mom. When I told her what had really happened with Noah, how he had manipulated me, how he had twisted everything to fit his narrative, she listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just listened. And then she said something I wasn't ready for. "You're stronger than I realized, Taylor," she said softly. "I don't know if I could have done what you're doing." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I had seen myself as the weak one, someone who had been too trusting, too forgiving. But my mom was right. I wasn't weak. I was reclaiming what had been stolen from me. After talking to my mom, I moved on to my coworkers. I couldn't allow them to believe Noah's version of events, the one where I was the bad guy, where I had abandoned him when he needed me the most. They needed to know he had manipulated me and used me as a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. I told them what had happened in a calm, measured way. I left out the personal pain, the private details. I simply told them that I was done with Noah, that I wasn't going back to a relationship built on deceit. Some of them were sympathetic. A few expressed their shock. A few apologized for not seeing it sooner. And then there were others who quietly excused themselves from the conversation, uncomfortable with the mess I was unraveling. I expected some people to turn on me. That's how this kind of story works. People choose sides, and they either stick with the truth or turn a blind eye. What I didn't expect was Noah's family to turn on him. When I contacted Mason, I wasn't sure what kind of reception I'd get. I expected resentment, maybe even anger. After all, I had destroyed the family's carefully curated version of Noah. But when I finally spoke to him, I was surprised by his relief. "You don't know how much this means," Mason said, his voice breaking for the first time. "Noah has a way of twisting things. He always has. I never knew how far it went." Mason, despite everything, was grateful. He told me he'd been trying to make sense of Noah's actions for years, but it never clicked until now. He promised to support me in any way he could, even if it meant losing Noah altogether. "I don't want anything to do with him anymore," he said. "If this is how he's treated you, he's done." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same brother who had been forced to cut Noah off, who had watched his family fracture and blamed himself for not doing more sooner. Now, Mason was seeing the truth of what Noah had done, and for the first time, he was the one who needed to rebuild. The ripple effect of the truth spread further than I could have imagined. William and Mina called me later that week. They didn't apologize for their role in making me feel invisible, but they admitted their own failures. They had overlooked Noah's manipulations, allowed him to twist their perception of me, and refused to believe the truth when it was staring them in the face. "We're so sorry for what you went through," William said, his voice thick with regret. "We should have seen it. We should have fought harder for you, too." At first, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to tell them how many times I had begged them to intervene when Noah refused to be honest. How many nights I had cried, wishing someone would see through his layers of charm. But I didn't, because at that moment I realized the most important thing of all. I didn't need their apology. I needed my own freedom, and I finally had it. But Noah, he didn't take this well. Of course, he didn't. When the engagement party was officially canceled, and I began telling people the truth about everything, Noah's message to me became clearer. He started threatening me again, using his words like weapons. He accused me of ruining his life, of turning everyone against him. He begged for reconciliation. He tried to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him, telling me how badly his life was falling apart. I didn't respond. I couldn't. And when I finally received Marcus's phone call that night, he had been over at my apartment to check in and found the damage done to the place. I knew the moment had arrived. It wasn't just Noah trying to drag me back. It wasn't just his family or my coworkers. It was the apathy and the silence I'd endured for so long. I wasn't going back. No more games. No more lies. The truth had already caught up with us, and now it was time for Noah to face the consequences. The aftermath of everything felt like walking through a fog, slow, uncertain, but somehow lighter with every step. I didn't know how to rebuild my life after everything that had happened, but I was determined to do it on my own terms. I moved into a new apartment, one with higher security and a fresh coat of paint. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt like freedom. My space, my decision, a place where my decisions couldn't be manipulated by someone else's lies. I kept my distance from everyone who had been connected to Noah, his family, his friends, his coworkers. I didn't need anyone else to explain him to me. I had heard enough. I had seen enough. The truth was clear now, and I didn't need to hold on to the pieces of a past that wasn't mine to fix anymore. Marcus helped me, as always. We spent nights together, talking through everything. And slowly, I found pieces of myself again, pieces I had given away so willingly before, thinking that love meant losing yourself for someone else. But here's the thing I've learned. Love should never make you feel small. Love shouldn't come at the cost of your self-worth. And most importantly, love is not about fixing someone else's brokenness at the expense of your own. Noah taught me the hard way that people who don't apologize for their actions, who twist the truth to suit their needs, will drain you without ever realizing it. And in the end, they'll always ask for more than you're willing to give. They'll never see the damage they cause. They'll never understand the wreckage left behind. I've learned to stop apologizing for choosing myself. I've learned to stop caring about someone who doesn't even care enough to be honest. And now I'm finally healing. I'm working on my own goals again, spending time with people who truly care, and slowly mending the trust I lost in myself. Noah isn't part of my life anymore, and I'm okay with that. I don't need him, and I won't ever let him take another piece of me. The hardest lesson I've learned is that some things don't deserve a second chance. The people who use you, lie to you, and break you, no matter how much you want to save them, they'll never change until they want to change. And that's not your responsibility. For me, the real healing came when I realized that I didn't need to be anyone's savior. I just needed to save myself. And that's what I'm doing now, one day at a time.